To talk more about masks and their effectiveness outdoors, I'm joined by epidemiologist Moïse Desvarieux. Thank you for joining us on France 24. The big question then, should we all be wearing face masks outside now as well as indoors?
The question is not really, the answer is no. We shouldn't. We don't have to, but people may choose. Keep in mind that what France has decided and certain cities have decided is to have the mask being worn in places where social distancing is not possible. So that's a very important distinction. It's not to say that everybody should wear a mask outdoor all the time. So that's the first thing. The second thing also that I think is important to stress is that wearing a mask doesn't dispense us of the necessity of doing the other things, meaning the social distancing, for example, which is very important and remains important. I think a comparison would be wearing seatbelt. Seatbelt as a face mask is an important additional measure to actually help us from a public health point of view. But you wouldn't wear a seatbelt and say, well, I'm wearing a seatbelt, therefore I can go 200 miles or 200 kilometers an hour, or I'm wearing a seatbelt, I can drink and drive. So it's the same thing for the mask. It's an important measure, but it has to be also put in addition with the other measure. It doesn't dispense us from the social distancing, from the washing of the hands, which remain important. The reason it is all the more so, mask efficacy has been demonstrated indoors, that's clear. The reason it's all the more important when you have crowded areas, like you were saying in your introduction, for example, in markets or busy streets, is because it mimics the situation of indoors. Because when you're in a busy street, for example, you cannot move quicker. So in effect, you're staying longer in contact because you're stuck in traffic, basically, and you're staying longer in contact with the people.
All right. Now, why do you think the advice on wearing masks has changed so much? At the beginning of the pandemic, the French government was telling people that masks were not necessary. They're now compulsory. Why has there been this big change?
Well, I think there has been some confusion, and I think part of it is reasons that are beyond my competence. But part of it also is that the knowledge has evolved. So there are different types of masks, first of all. You have the basic masks, which are the cloth masks or face covering. And then you have the more extended masks, like 2-3 layers. You have the surgical mask and you have the medical mask, the surgical medical mask, and then you have the N95 that are reserved for personnel. So each one of them provides a different level of protection in terms of fine particles of 0.3 microns. But any mask is better than no mask. So it has changed in part because first we have learned more about the virus. And we know right now that, for example, aerosolization is possible, particularly in closed spaces. So in a closed space, that's where the risk is actually higher. So this is not something that we knew originally. And after that, the variations also, I'm sure, depends on different countries have different reasons for why this has been so varied in terms of the recommendations. And I won't get into that because that's not my purview. But I can understand why the public would be somewhat confused. But
Okay,
thing that is
yes, sorry, go ahead.
One thing that is clear is that in indoor settings, masks provide protection. No protection is 100%. But there are, for example, there are at least 2 quick studies I can cite. One is 2 hairstylists in the United States that were infected with COVID-19. And before they got tested, they saw 139 clients. But they were very careful about both themselves and the clients, always and consistently and correctly, meaning on the nose and the mouth, wearing the mask. 0 client got infected. But they were wearing the mask, and the parents also, even while cutting their hair, they kept the mask on one side and having
Just
it on.
shows,
So that's
just
the
shows
first
how
point.
effective they can be. Just a quick word on schools, if you don't mind. They are, of course, due to open in a month, and there's been a lot of speculation about how contagious children might be. What is the latest evidence on that, and will schools be able to function normally in September?
Well, I don't know what normally is. We do have a new normal, but the evidence on kids has been also evolving. There's a study that came out as late as a couple of days ago that shows that some kids that were less than 5 years old were excreting virus at about perhaps 10 times the level of adults. And that's kind of new because so the evidence is mixed because there was a study before that was saying that children under 9 were not as infectious. So the jury is still out in terms of kids. But one thing in terms of reopening kids that is important is that it's not just about the virus. There are also consequences if kids don't go to school in terms of the developmental advances and other types of consequences. So I tend to understand that schools and kids have to be able to go to school. The question is they have to go to school safely for themselves, safely from the teachers, and safely for the parents and families when they get home. So that's where the whole crux is right now. But the evidence there also has been switching. Remember, this is a new virus and a new disease. So we're learning as we go along, with often sometimes mistakes that are made. Some of them perhaps could have been avoided, and some of them not. Yep. But we're learning. Yeah.
The science is constantly evolving. Well, thank you very much indeed, Moïse Desvarieux.